Hey everybody, I'm John Reardon, you're watching NWR TV. Recently, I posted my preview of Xenoblade Chronicles 3, and I hopped on Twitter to tell you guys that if you had any questions, to just ask me, and as long as I could answer them within the embargo restrictions, I would. And boy, you guys had a lot of questions that I didn't even think of actually addressing in the preview, so I got so many that instead of answering each individual one on Twitter, I have answered a lot of them, but I figured I would kind of bring them all together, make a single video answering every question I've gotten so far that I am allowed to answer. So if you don't see your question, it probably means that something in the embargo restrictions are prohibiting me from answering that question. Hopefully I can get to it once the review embargo lifts and I have a little more freedom for what I can talk about. One other quick disclaimer I do want to put on this, because I am restricted by a preview embargo, I may make comments like, within the preview embargo period, you can do this or you can't do that. That may mean that within the entire game you can't do that, but I'm technically only allowed to say this, and I don't want to give a definitive answer for the entire game because technically I'm kind of not allowed to. It could also mean that you don't have that in the preview, but it is later in the game. So I apologize, some of those answers are going to be kind of non-answers, just because of the limitations I do have, but I still want to give you some sort of answer. I'll try to avoid those whenever possible. So let's start with one of those. One of the most common questions I got is, can you level down at campsites? This is something they've done in previous Xenoblade games. You can go to campsites and use bonus XP to level up kind of outside of battle. That is still here, leveling up outside of battle is. Within the preview period, you cannot level down at campsites. You can only level up. Another super common question I got was, how many save slots are there? There are 3 manual saves, where you just go into the pause menu and hit save, and you have 3 slots to save in there. There is also a quick save, which is a little confusing because you can't actually get to it using the default control setup. Essentially, if you hold down one of the triggers, you have a series of shortcuts that come up, and the quick save is not actually one of those by default. You have to customize the settings for that quick menu and give yourself the option to quick save. Once you do, you can save at any time with a button combo, which is super nice. So technically you kind of have 4 manual saves, and then your 5th save is just an auto save. This is in contrast to Xenoblade 2, where you famously only had 1 save. So like in that game, when you finished it, it would offer you a new game plus, and you would have to save over your old game to do that. Which if you're like me, you didn't want to do. So having multiple saves is helpful. I have a couple people asking about the quick move and running. So when you're in combat, you have a new move called the quick move, and you do this by clicking down the right stick, and it allows you to essentially do a quick little scoot, kind of like, it looks like a dodge. It's not really a dodge because of the way Xenoblade's combat works, though it would allow you to quickly get out of area of effect attacks. But it essentially allows you to quickly move around to a different side of an enemy, or to quickly zip over to a party member to help them or revive them or whatever you need to do. This does not work outside of combat, and there is no dedicated run button outside of combat. You just have your normal run speed. So this is unlike Xenoblade Chronicles X, which famously did have a run button. I would love if they brought that back. I thought it was a great feature in that game, and with worlds this big, it's nice to be able to go extra fast, but there is no run button in this game. Several people asked about kind of the world setup, and whether this is open world, whether it's seamless. Now, I did talk a little bit about this in the actual preview. If you haven't seen that, you should go watch it. But to summarize, it works a lot like Xenoblade Chronicles 1. So you'll have a large area, and then you'll get to the end of that area and you will load into a new one. Xenoblade 1 did the same thing. Xenoblade 2 kind of did the same thing, but because it was all separate titans, each titan was essentially its own loading zone, so you never really saw it stitched together like that. Now, some people, when I said that in the review, were like, so it's not open world. It is. It's, much like any Xenoblade game, they may say, we need you to go from point A to point B, and that's, the main storyline. But there's lots of branches off of that. The world you're going through is very wide. You may feel like you're going through a hallway, but if you take a second and turn left, you'll see like, oh no, there's this path over here that goes winding over this way. I can't really go into the scale of the world because of the preview embargo, but what I will say is that even within the single zone that I am allowed to talk about within the preview embargo, I don't think I've been absolutely everywhere, and I don't think I've found absolutely everything. and that is after rolling credits on the game. So that should give you some idea of the scale of the world, even though I can't really go into any more detail than that. I've got questions about the docked and handheld resolutions of the game. I do not have firm numbers on that. One, because the upscaling and anti-aliasing that Xenoblade uses makes it very, 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 very hard to get a firm resolution count at any time. Essentially, the moment you maybe get one frame when like a camera cuts in a cutscene before everything kind of kicks in to actually get a resolution count. But after that, it's like borderline impossible. It also uses, like every other Xenoblade that has been on Switch, it uses a dynamic resolution. So you can go anywhere from looking pretty darn sharp to if you get into like a really heavy combat situation or you're in a cutscene with a lot of characters on screen, you may notice it get blurrier. And this is true for handheld as well. What I will say is that overall, I feel that the image quality is a significant improvement over Xenoblade 2, especially in handheld mode. Some of that is because they don't have the sharpening filter that they had in Xenoblade 2. In that one, you would really notice when it would get low resolution, they would essentially try to artificially sharpen the image. And if you've ever used like Photoshop or something on a blurry picture and then just push the sharpen filter, that doesn't work. And it just looked awful. In my opinion, it actually made the game look worse. This game doesn't do that. So even when it does go to a lower resolution, it's a much cleaner low resolution, if that makes sense. So yeah, I don't have firm resolution numbers on there, but I can say it is significantly higher than Xenoblade 2, whether you're playing docked or handheld. Xenoblade 2 I felt was borderline not really worth playing handheld. This one you can play handheld and that's fine. It doesn't cause an issue. I've got some questions about difficulty. There are 3 difficulties that you can choose from when you start the game, and you can also switch between them freely as you're playing from the pause menu. So anytime you're not in combat, you can switch difficulties. Those are just easy, normal, and hard. I haven't dug too much into the other difficulties. I have switched to them just like casually to kind of see how they work. And they appear similar to what was in Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition and what was eventually added to Xenoblade Chronicles 2. The easy mode essentially just means that enemies take a lot more damage very easily and you take less damage. What I can tell from hard mode, enemies take less damage, you take more. Pretty straightforward stuff. But I appreciate it being there, and I think that having a more casual difficulty for these games is great in terms of accessibility. And if you're like me, and you've played these games enough, you've replayed them enough, that you kind of really have a feel for them, having that hard mode, especially like if you want to replay the game, I think is going to be really interesting. Can you stutter step? So for those of you who haven't played Xenoblade 2, because of the way the combat system worked in that game, with certain characters, you only attack when you're standing still. And for some characters, the time difference between when you stop moving and when you do a first attack versus when you do the second attack, that initial start stopping to first attack was actually a shorter time. So with certain characters, you could essentially attack, barely touch the control stick and make your character move just a tiny bit, and they would almost immediately attack again. So with, I'm pretty sure like the main like Pyra Mithra blade was one of them, where you could just tilt the stick a tiny bit between every attack and you would just essentially do a constant stream of auto attacks, which was not only great for doing damage, but it also charged up your arts. You cannot do that in this one, which makes sense. That was, I'm honestly surprised they never patched that out of Xenoblade 2. But yeah, it does seem that they've addressed the issue in this one. And a lot of that just comes because there's not that same combo system that was in Xenoblade 2, where auto attacks progress into different auto attacks. This one is more like Xenoblade 1 in that respect. You do still only attack while staying still, but that attack is not built on a combo, so you cannot do the stutter to step, unfortunately. A couple questions about the interface in general. It feels good. It reminds me a lot of the Xenoblade Chronicles DE interface. Very similar kind of setup there. I will say the new navigation guidance system is great. I wasn't sure if it was going to feel too handholdy, but I wound up essentially just having it turned on the whole time. And it's subtle enough that I found that if I didn't want to pay attention to it, I really didn't even notice it was there. But this is probably the first Xenoblade game I've played where, even as somebody who I feel is very good at reading Xenoblade maps, I never got lost or didn't know where I was supposed to be going in this game. which I cannot say about any other Xenoblade game, except maybe X, which also had a navigation system that I guess Xenoblade 2 just sort of forgot about. So it's good to have some sort of navigation system back in this one, and I think it works well. Are the healers actually fun to play? Yes, I enjoy playing the healers quite a bit. The cool thing about this game, and this will touch on the class system just a little bit, because all of your classes are separated into attack or tank or healer, you're going to have multiple of each type. So you may find that even if you don't like a certain tank or a certain healer or a certain attacker, there may be another class within that category that you actually really enjoy. So I can only talk about essentially the main 6 party members for the sake of the preview. But yeah, I really like several of the classes just within that. And I think both of the healer classes I actually used quite a bit as Noah and swapped him into those. And the cool thing about that is then as you master those classes, some of their skills and arts can transfer back into non-healer classes, which can be really useful. And the great thing is that even if you decide that you don't like playing as the healer, but you want Noah to pick up some of those healer skills, and so you have him as a healer, you could switch over to maybe Lance, who maybe you have set up as an attacker right now in a class that you do like. Maybe you really like Noah's starting class. You can just use whichever character you assign to Noah's starting class as the other characters are learning other skills. You don't have to play as Noah the whole time. Even within combat, you can just switch to any character you want on the fly, which is extremely helpful. It's also great if you feel like your healer isn't quite doing what you want them to do, which is a problem with other Xenoblade games because your party is AI controlled and you don't have direct influence over them in most of the games. Being able to say, this healer isn't covering these guys over here, they're gonna die. You can switch to that healer and go run over there and help them, which is nice. It gives you a lot more party control than you had in previous Xenoblades. How is the music? Music's good. It's the same folks who did Xenoblade 1 and Xenoblade 2, so you kind of know what you're getting. It's real good music. It is largely original music. I had some people asking me if there were songs from old Xenoblade games. Within the preview period, I believe everything, there might be some like homages to older stuff, but it's all brand new music, and it's very good. It has a slightly different feel than Xenoblade 1 or 2, which I also feel like had a different feel from each other. So it definitely feels like its own independent soundtrack, but is immediately identifiable as the Xenoblade soundtrack. It's great. Can you use the video capture button on the Switch? Yes, you can capture from either docked or handheld using the video capture button on the Switch, which is actually, if you watch the preview, all of the handheld footage was captured using that, which is why it's compressed and maybe not the best representation of how that actually looks in handheld mode, but it's something. Are there any QuickTime events? This was an interesting question because this is something that I didn't realize until a ways into the game. But yeah, there are almost no QuickTime events during battle, which is, if you played other Xenoblade games, you would occasionally get those instances of, it would have an A button on screen with the circle going toward the A, and you need to push it as the circle collides with the A. And maybe that would be for a healing thing, or to encourage a party member, or to get more damage on a talent art, or what have you. That doesn't happen in Xenoblade Chronicles 3. The closest thing to a QuickTime event there is if you get, I don't remember if it's dazed or toppled, some sort of, like, you have to stay still now status effect. You can mash a button and wiggle the joystick to shorten the length of that. That is really the only thing like that in combat in this game, which honestly I think I like. I didn't notice it was gone right away, but I think I like. And honestly, because there are, once you factor in hero characters, which I can't talk too much about right now, but once you factor them in, you do have a party of 7 people. And like I said, you can be constantly swapping between them if you want. So there's a lot going on. And I think having those QuickTime events would maybe make it a little bit too much. I think being able to just freely move through the battle without having to worry about that stuff slowing things down and stopping you while you're playing as a certain character is a good move. I think that works really well. Similar to some of the class stuff that I talked about earlier, we have questions asking what is the benefit of switching classes? Mainly, it is to fill out your roster of arts. So you start out, you have 3 arts that are assigned to X, Y, and B on your right hand. And then the D-pad, up, right, and down, can be assigned to other arts, but those are all reserved for arts that you pull over from other classes once you master those classes. And so the main thing of doing these other classes is to fill out that roster and give you more arts to choose from, to the point where eventually you can have 6 arts that are accessible at any time. I cannot tell you how long the game is. That I got that one a lot. I can't, sorry. Does it have an event theater? Yes, it does. Just like Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition. Is there a photo mode? Not really, but what I will say is that there is an option if you press L and R at the same time. It will take a screenshot, but it will remove the HUD from the screenshot. So if you just want a nice, clean screenshot of the environment with your party in it, you can do that using L and R at the same time, which is a great feature. And that way you can do it without, like, you can still have your map and all of your quest stuff up on screen for while you're actually playing, but you can get these nice, clean screenshots, which is a neat feature. Are there any bonuses for having Xenoblade DE and or Xenoblade 2 save files? I don't think so. If there were, I didn't realize that's why I got them. So I don't think there are. I could be wrong, but I didn't see anything that seemed to be caused by me having those save files already on my Switch. Are you able to switch the game's language? Yes. So in the pause menu at any time, you can switch from English voice acting to Japanese voice acting. It'll keep the rest of the game stays in English, assuming you have your Switch set to English, but the voice acting will change to be Japanese, if you prefer that. And that is not like an extra download or anything. That is just within the base game. Someone asked what cleaning your clothes at campsites does. I don't know. So when you get to campsites, there's a button that lets you clean your character's clothes, and you will notice as you run around that your character's clothes do get dirty. Occasionally, they will even comment on it as you're running around. I don't think it does anything. It causes them to stop complaining about it, and it changes visually how your clothes look. But as far as like buffing your character or anything, I don't think it does anything. I did check through all of the tips and tutorials and everything to see if there was any reference to this, and I cannot find anything. So I think it is purely cosmetic. I could be wrong, but I believe it is purely cosmetic. I've got a few questions about just how I feel about kind of the writing and like the main characters in general and how I feel about your party. And I really like them. I'm a big fan of Lance, personally. He's got sort of some Rhine energy, and we're well past Rhine time at this point. So yeah, Lance immediately appeals to me. But the whole main party, I think Noah and Miu in particular are both very well written. And yeah, Tyon and Senna and Uni, they're all really well written characters that I pretty immediately got attached to. I can't talk about too many outside, like those are within the preview embargo. There aren't a lot of like hero characters introduced or anything, so I can really only talk about the main party members. But they're all very well written, and the voice actors do a good job, and I've enjoyed all of them. I did have some people ask about field skills, which if you played Xenoblade 2 is where you would get up to an obstacle and you would need certain skills that were leveled up to a certain point within your party to progress past that point. Within the preview period, there are no field skill barriers of any kind, which I view as a good thing. I was not a fan of those, but yeah, there are none of those within the preview period for the game. I've got some questions about charging arts. You may have seen in some previews and footage that you have the Kavesi arts and the Agnes arts charge up differently. So Kavesi arts constantly charge up over time, and Agnes arts charge up via auto attacks. If you're paying close attention, you will notice that that's how it worked in Xenoblade 1 versus Xenoblade 2, with Kavesi operating like Xenoblade 1 combat and Agnes operating like Xenoblade 2 combat, which is a really nice touch. But people were asking with Agnes, your auto attacks are charging up your moves. They asked if there was any way to speed up Kavesi art recharging. There is not, but what I found is that because they may charge up technically kind of slower, but because they're charging up all of the time, even when you are repositioning in combat, they wind up being roughly equivalent with Agnes Arts charging up. And finally, the last question we're going to talk about is about the audio mix as far as cutscenes go and how the music is mixed versus dialogue. It's just as bad as all the other Xenoblade games. My recommendation when starting any of these games is to go into the menu and, depending on which game it is and how exactly they have it set up, either turn up the dialogue just a couple notches or turn down the music just a couple notches. You do kind of have to mix these games yourself. Luckily, the subtitles are on by default, in case you forget, so you can just read along. But yeah, the audio mix, the music is good, I guess, and they really want you to hear it, even more than they want you to hear the voice acting sometimes. But yeah, if you have more questions, good chance, I know there were some questions I didn't answer. I am not allowed to answer them. Later in the month, once the review embargo lifts, I will have way more freedom to actually talk about kind of the nitty-gritty of later stuff within the game. For now, this is about as much as I can do, but if you want to keep sending me questions, you can. You can look me up on Twitter using the handle on screen and shoot me any questions there. Follow me so you can see when the review comes out. You can also follow at Nintendo_NWR. That's the Nintendo World Report Twitter, as we will continue to have more Xenoblade coverage as we move toward launch later this month, along with every other Nintendo game, because that's what we do. Thank you very much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing to Nintendo World Report TV and checking out NintendoWorldReport.com for a whole lot more. If you'd like to chat with us about this or anything else Nintendo related, you can go over to our Discord using the link in the description. So once again, thank you for watching. My name's John Raridan, and I will see you next time. Bye. This video was made possible by our generous supporters on Patreon. Did you know that Nintendo World Report is funded directly by fans like you? When you support Nintendo World Report on Patreon, you get immediate access to multiple exclusive podcasts every month, exclusive Discord channels, an early look at select content, and more, all for as little as $1 a month. Check out patreon.com/NWR for all the details.